And now once you've done that, right? So you've done these things where you've done the tactical work, you've done the work inside and so on, or you're still doing some of the work, right? Then it's a matter of holding the boundary when someone pushes against it. Now, in some cases, that's going to be easy, right? In other cases, it may take some redirection attempts before the boundary is finally respected. But you may run into situations where your boundaries are not just being disrespected, but the result is that you feel impotent and powerless to affect change. Okay, so that's a very different situation where you set the boundary and you don't feel like you have a choice. Like, let's say your boss is like, you have to work and do this, and there is an implicit understanding that you're going to get fired if you don't, right? And it's an enormous amount of privilege to be able to then just say, okay, well, I'm out, right? Like that's not opportunity that is afforded to everyone. And so many of us have felt that way, and we do not know that when that happens, you have institutional support to assist you if you do not feel like you have the freedom to set reasonable boundaries, okay? So what I would recommend, if you do feel that way, right? You feel like I've set boundaries, but I don't feel safe to maintain them, or I don't feel safe to set them, or I feel powerless to set them or maintain them. First, you've got to know your company policies about using your personal devices for work, right? So first thing is knowing your company policies. Okay, you got to know what your policies are so that you can always go back to them, especially if your policies support whatever it is that you want to do, right? So like if your boss is saying you have to work late, but the policies are that nobody works after 5, that policy will support you. Assuming your manager is not the person who is disrespecting your boundaries, speak to your manager if you feel like your boundaries are being disrespected. Know what support you have available. If you do not know what support you have available, if your manager is not an appropriate place, check out if your organization has an employee assistance program, so an EAP. Those have come a long way since the 80s. So back in the 80s, like, you know, there were kind of like workshops and whatever, and those are still great, but a lot of them have some really great resources like coaching, like resume services, support services, ways, people that you can work with to help you massage a certain situation and help navigate your way out of it, to either set or maintain a boundary or figure out what you may want to do next. If you have a mentor, right? If you have a mentor, reach out to them and ask them how they set boundaries or deal with similar situations. You can also, by the way, reach out to me. Anytime you want, you can reach out to me. My personal life mission is to help people find joy in the workplace. And when you have situations with your boundaries, depending on what it is, it can really rob you of that joy. So I may not necessarily be the person to help you, but I have a giant network of people who may be able to help you depending on whatever the problem is. So you're always welcome to reach out to me and ask, hey, listen, I need help. Get comfortable talking to other people in your team, in your organization. Build your network outside of your organization. One of the greatest things that's ever happened to me is building my research administration networking community, because what I found is that whether you're in a university, academia, healthcare, nonprofit, like all of these places, industry, startups, they all have very similar challenges. Like each one has their own unique challenges. I've worked in all of them, and they all have unique challenges to themselves, right? So that you're going to have to deal with, but there are a lot of shared experiences, and those shared experiences allow us to, one, feel like we're less alone, but two, crowdsource for solutions. So I would strongly recommend networking. Now, if you are a manager, please know that people watch what you do, not what you say. If you're a workaholic and you tell your team to take time off, don't be surprised to find that some of your less experienced hires will not take that time off, or your very experienced hires will not take time off. You as a manager have a responsibility to lead by example, no matter how difficult it is for you to set boundaries, to not allow yourself to be mistreated by your staff or your supervisors, calling out microaggressions. Like, the managers really do act as not just supervisors, but as leaders to a team to show what is the workplace culture, what is appropriate behavior. If you are not a manager and are a peer leader, and if you are, you know exactly who you are, you too are being watched, and people will follow a lot of what you do. So and I was that person, so I had a responsibility. And it was interesting because my boss was the one who taught me that, because I said, oh, I never told anybody not to take time off. And she explained to me about how my behavior made other people feel like they needed to do the same thing, because in order to, like, as we were saying earlier, be rewarded, right? Because I was being rewarded for that unhealthy behavior. So at the time, it was venerated. So amazing. Minessa's so capable, does so much stuff. And I remember being like, yeah, because I had such self-esteem issues. I took it in. It wasn't until years later that I recognized that that for me personally, I was trying to get validation through working all the time. When I let go of that, I didn't mind clocking out so much. So that's not the story for everyone, but you may have your own story. And the reason why I bring that up is just because a lot of times we think that dealing with working and overworking and stuff is just doing with the tactics, and it's not. There's a lot of underlying shit that you have to go through to be able to actually do the thing that you want to do. It's not, because sometimes people will say, well, I tried to do the thing and I just couldn't make myself do it. And I tried. I'm just like, right? That usually means there's something else going on. Don't put that level of pressure onto yourself. Like, that's really unkind to do to you, right? Because there's something else that needs to be worked on first, and then once you work on that, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to do that thing, it happens like that so easily, right? The last thing I want to recommend is to follow some of the people that I've tagged in the show notes and on Instagram and YouTube. These are people who specialize in content related to reclaiming your worth, understanding your value, and building security around setting and maintaining boundaries in corporate America. Real Courageous Leaderships, Lessons from a Quitter, Dorothy Mashburn. These are all incredible leaders in the field who talk about work and boundaries in such a way that allows us to understand and recalibrate into what an appropriate workplace is. Because as I stated in an earlier video, a lot of the things that are unspoken expectations in the workplace are wildly real. Okay. And it is the not naming of those things that is creating the unhealthy work cultures that honestly spurred the mass resignations and is continuing to create a problem in our industry. Let's talk about adjusting your boundary mindset, right? So now we've talked about all of the things, right? So now let's talk about adjusting your boundary mindset. Here's the thing with saying no. Nobody likes to hear no. And people don't like saying no. I hate it. It makes me feel gross and icky to say no. I feel like I'm letting someone down. I'm letting myself down as a person. I also feel like I should be able to do it all. If I say no, it's like admitting I can't do everything. Newsflash. I can't do everything. Clearly, there's a lot of baggage that comes with being able to say no to people, right? And for that, I am in therapy. It helps. But here's the thing about boundaries, all that aside. Barely anyone sets them, but we all wish we did. Okay? Barely anyone sets boundaries, but we all wish that we set them. When we run into someone who sets boundaries, we are inspired. We wonder, how on earth did they learn how to do that? We start to wonder if maybe we can say no too. It shows us what is possible for us. There's also something to be said for someone who says that they can't commit to something because it's not part of their mission. It's a tough thing to hear, but people who hear you have a mission often just want to hear more about the mission. They've forgotten about the no. Don't let someone else's urgency determine your level of urgency. You can get caught up in other people's momentum. Just because Second, do not get caught up in other people's urgency. Do not let someone else's urgency determine your level of urgency. You can get so caught up in other people's momentum. Just because someone says they have to have something by tomorrow, if you know that the actual deadline is in 2 weeks, you can do it in the morning. Just because someone says they need something now doesn't mean they actually need it now. And as research administrators, part of our job responsibility is learning how to calibrate that. Third, when people call, you do not have to pick up just because your phone rings. And which is really funny because for years, I remember as a child, I was on the phone all the time. I'd be wrapping up on my cord, talking to my friends. Now I haven't had my ringer on since 2005. My ringer's been off. People hate that about it. They hate that about me. My God, my family, it drove them crazy. And I will tell you, this boundary has been the hardest for me to maintain. We are now at a stage 10 years down. Oh God, let's see, I started 2005, so 20 years in. It wasn't until 10 years in to me having my ringer off and my notifications off and everything off that people finally understood that this isn't a phase. I'm not being obnoxious. This is just how I am. And I do not have my notifications on. Just because you call, I'm not picking up. If we need to talk, we can set up a time. When they call, you do not have to pick up. One of the things that we somehow inherently respond to is someone reaching out. And in today's world, we are conditioned to accept hyper-responsiveness as a given. And as a result, we have unrealistic expectations of our own response time and those of others. This is not how it is. This is how it has become because we have allowed it to be so. In an episode In my episode with Tanessa Shares, the link is in the show notes, we talk about how we, neither of us, and you can see the card on the screen if you're on YouTube, about how neither of us are accessible via our phones. If you need to find us, in an episode of the podcast with Tanessa Shares, I talk about how we are, in an episode of the Stop Shitting All Over, you know what, just get some tea. Here we go. This isn't how it is. This is how it has become. Because think about it. There was a time where people could not get a hold of us immediately. Most of us were alive during that time. Many of us were alive during that time. There's an episode I have with Tanessa Shares where we both talk about living a happy and productive life. She's a Hack Your Life coach, which basically she uses wearable technology to help you live your best life. But in this particular conversation, we were talking about the cultural acceptance of just constantly being able to get a hold of somebody, and how both of us have our ringers off and our notifications off, and it drives everybody crazy. Now, I've had this for years and years and years now, over decades now. But when I first turned off my notifications and turned off my ringer, it caused there was a lot of boundary issues, like a lot of boundary issues. It really bothered people. People got angry. They got upset. Like, this is not a boundary issue where people were just like, oh, okay, I'll learn how to respect your boundary. Like, people were pissed that I turned off my notifications and that I turned off my ringer because they wanted to be able to get a hold of me. And I realized it wasn't about like anger as much as it was about rejection, right? As much as they were like, you're rejecting me because you're not picking up the phone, right? I am autistic and I have ADHD. I have a whole relationship with the phone. Okay. Whole relationship. And it took a long time and actually a lot of research over the years on autism and ADHD for me to continuously send this information to them, because I didn't want them to be hurt by my boundary, but by doing what they wanted, it hurt me because it had a giant impact on me to be able to pick up the phone anytime someone called. So eventually we got to a space, everybody's happy, now they understand, right? And so the boundaries being respected, but it took a while and it was very, very difficult. So the boundaries that we've been talking about so far have been PI related boundaries that are work related and so on. But there are going to be boundaries that you'll set that are going to take a long time for people to understand why you were setting that boundary, and for people to workshop it in their brains that it's not about them. You're not rejecting them. And that is, I think, the hard part for a lot of us, is that we don't want to hurt other people's feelings with our boundaries. So a lot of times we will allow our days, our lives, our injury to happen, whatever that injury looks like, to make sure that the other person doesn't feel bad. And what we really need to be doing is everybody sort of being upfront with what makes me comfortable, and then we kind of can all work together. And it's not necessarily about saying, why do I always have to customize to you? Or why do I always have to customize to you? As much as it's fun fact where we're at now is both like the people in my life, they are very articulate about what they need, and I'm able to give it to them. And what we've learned now is that I know what their puzzle piece looks like. They know what my puzzle piece looks like, and they fit together, and it's great, but it's built off of authenticity. And a lot of the times my relationships with the people that I work with, my bosses, my staff, my investigators, the companies that I work with, is built on that, is on having a conversation, having many conversations over the course of a relationship about these individual things, and really getting customized in terms of how you work together. And the more you do that, the better your relationship becomes. So the truth is that the boundaries sound like they are something that creates tension in a relationship. It is only initial tension that then turns into something great. I think of it as akin to working out, right? You go to work out and you're in the gym and you're doing your thing. I don't, but let's say someone else does. My God, that hurts. I'm doing this lift. I feel that burn, right? I don't feel it, but let's feel it, right? It's not, but when it's over and you've recovered, now people say, damn, look at your arms. Look so great, right? But you had to go through that to get to that other thing. That's what boundaries are. But many of us don't want to set boundaries because, God, I don't go to the gym.